This is a brief demonstration of how to use the web-based user interface of our HIV Care Continuum System Dynamics simulation model. The purpose of the interface is to allow the general public to use the simulation model to understand the complex HIV Care Continuum system and to run various simulations using the model, or what we call what-if scenarios, to seek ways to improve the system and reduce the HIV epidemic at the community level. The link to the interface can be found on our model's webpage at www.hivcaresystemdynamics.org. This link takes you to the introduction to the model. You can read a brief description of what this model is and how it is intended to be used. The image shows the 9 different interconnected modules in the full HIV Care Continuum System Dynamics model. These include the central HIV infection and treatment as prevention module, the 4 basic services modules, including HIV testing and prevention services, medical care services for people living with HIV, Ryan White case management services, and housing, substance use treatment, and mental health services for people living with HIV, and the 4 community-level action strategy modules, including peer outreach to promote HIV testing, peer advocacy to support people living with HIV, expanded HIV testing and sexual health screening in primary care, and mobilizing community initiatives to support people living with HIV. The red lines indicate the interconnections among these 9 modules in the full HIV Care Continuum System Dynamics model. You'll also notice some buttons on the bottom of the screen. The Background Resources button takes you out to a separate PDF. The document gives you information about how the model was built and who contributed to building it, some of our publications about the model, including some websites where you can get more detailed information about the inner workings of the model, limitations to how the model should be used, acknowledgments, how to contact us, and copyright information. We'll come back to the Go to the Model button, but first let's click on How to Use the Model. This button takes you to a series of 17 pages that walk you through the structure of this interface and how you can use this model for various purposes. Because these instructions are fairly long and detailed, and you might want to return to various sections of it, we have made a PDF of the full instructions. You can reach it by clicking the Full Instructions button at the bottom of this first page. Then print it out or save it. To get around the How to Use the Model instructions pages, use the Next and Back buttons. You can always leave these instructions and get back to the model by clicking on the green Go to Model button at any time. Clicking Next takes you to page 2 of How to Use the Model. This page explains that we have organized this interface into different levels. The top level, indicated by green buttons, focuses on the overall model and particularly the central HIV infection and treatment as prevention module. You can always get to the top level by clicking on a green button. The second level includes the light blue Basic Services buttons and the yellow Action Strategies buttons. In a minute, we'll also look at a third level, which are subcomponents of the Basic Service and Action Strategy modules. For now, let's go to page 3. Each of the modules has 3 different types of pages: a dashboard page, a performance page, and a parameters page. When working inside one of the modules, you can easily go back and forth between these pages to set your numbers and run simulations. We'll talk more about each of these in a minute. As mentioned before, some of the modules have subsections or components because they are somewhat large or include more than one model. When working in a module with components, you can move back and forth between the components by clicking on the dark blue boxes. You will always land in one component when you click on the module's box, shown here on the same level as the module box itself. For example, when you click on the HIV infection and treatment as prevention module, you will land on the Care Continuum component, but you'll see a dark blue button at the bottom of the page for the infection rate component, and vice versa, so you can easily toggle between the 2 components of the module. Each of the components also has a dashboard, performance, and parameters page. Let's go to page 5. This page of How to Use the Model shows a typical dashboard screen. The page includes several things. First, you'll see a diagram of the stock and flow model for that module. You might not be familiar with the terms stock and flow. Notice at the bottom of this page is a button called Explanation of Model Symbols and Terms. This takes you out to another PDF with some of the most common terms and concepts used in system dynamics modeling, such as stocks, flows, and feedback loops. You can print this out and refer back to it as needed. You'll also see some sliders or other tools to change settings of one or more key variables in this module. Two red function buttons on the dashboard page include Run and Explain Diagram. The Run button will run a simulation. The Explain Diagram button will pop up a detailed description of the stock and flow model you're looking at. We'll see an example of this later in this demonstration. The dashboard page also has a few of the main output graphs for this module. Buttons on the bottom of every page allow you to move up to the top level with the green buttons, move within this module to the Performance and Parameters pages with the orange buttons, or move to a different component of this module with the dark blue buttons if there are components. Let's go to the next page. Page 6 of How to Use the Model shows a typical performance screen. This page focuses primarily on output graphs showing key variables in this module, as well as key indicators that affect other parts of the HIV care continuum model. All these graphs have similar features. They show the title of the graph. They show a 5-year time horizon with months 0 through 60. They show the unit being measured, such as persons, proportion, and so on. And they show the comparison runs with different colored and solid dashed or dotted lines, which are labeled Run 1, Run 2, and so on. Also on this page are two red function buttons, including Run and Clear runs. After you do one or more simulation runs to look at and compare the outcomes in the graphs, you can clear them out and start again. It's important to remember that this clears the runs from all of the graphs throughout the HIV care continuum model in all of the modules. Now let's go to page 7. Page 7 of the How to Use the Model shows a typical parameter screen. A parameter is a numeric value for any of the variables in the simulation model that can be changed by model users. These may include conditions of the local setting, available local resources, or other variables that affect the care continuum or people living with HIV. For example, this shows parameters in the housing services model, including housing conditions of the population, housing support resources, and housing support service delivery. You may want to change parameters to tailor the model to your local area, or to test different simulation runs or what-if scenarios. It is important to note that before changing a parameter, you should think carefully about your reason for changing it. For example, to tailor the model or to test different proposed actions through simulation. And you should have a good rationale for the proposed new value for that variable. For example, you have a source of community data or stakeholder knowledge, or you hypothesize that the new value is expected to generate better health outcomes. To help you with thinking through which parameters you want or need to change, and to keep track of your changes, we have created a PDF called Parameter Worksheet, accessed with this purple button, that lists the modifiable parameters in each of the modules, with space for you to write down your proposed new values before typing them into the parameter boxes in the model interface. We'll open that PDF later in this demonstration. This page also has two red function buttons, including Run and Restore All Inputs. It is a good idea to hit Run before changing any of the parameters to get a base case simulation run for Run 1. Then you can change one or more parameters and run additional scenarios for comparison. You can click on the module's orange Performance button to see the results of the comparison simulation runs. It's important to remember that hitting Restore All Inputs returns every parameter in the HIV care continuum model to its original values. So if you tailored the model to your location, you will need to enter those numbers again. That is why it's a good idea to use the Parameters Worksheet to keep track of your own local values for key epidemiological, population, and service utilization parameters, and also to keep track of the different parameter changes you tested in your what-if simulation runs. Pages 8 through 17 of the How to Use the Model walk you through an example of how to conduct two different simulation runs by changing parameters in the Housing Services for People Living with HIV module, and to compare the results with a base case scenario and with each other. I highly recommend you read closely through this example and come back to it later if need be. That is why I encourage you to print out these how to use the model instructions and keep them handy as a reference tool. Remember, you can access the PDF with the purple button on page 1 of these instructions. But for now, I want to take you to the model itself and look at some of these features live. So I'm going to click on the Go to Model button. If you recall, the green Go to Model button takes you to the top level of the whole HIV care continuum system dynamics model, where you can access any of the modules by clicking on their colored buttons, including the green Central Module, HIV Infection and Treatment as Prevention, the light blue Basic Services modules, or the yellow Action Strategies modules. Be sure to click on the colored button, not on the clear boxes. This top level serves two purposes. First, it provides access to the setup and outputs for the whole model. Second, it shows the details of the HIV infection and treatment as prevention module. You may recall we already looked at the introduction, background resources, and how to use the model buttons. Now let's look at the green model setup button. The model setup button takes you to a parameter screen for the whole model. This is also the parameters page for the HIV infection and treatment as prevention module. Here you can see the main population and epidemiological parameters that were used to create and validate the HIV care continuum system dynamics model. Begin simulations by clicking the red Run button on any page to get the base case scenario for making comparisons with other simulations. Then you can click around to the various performance pages in the different modules to see the trends over time in the model outputs. Running a base case scenario helps you to explore how variables relate to each other and create complex system dynamics. Also, remember that when you click Restore All Inputs, you return all these numbers to the original values you see here. We also recommend that when you are running comparison simulations, you hit Run after each step and document your steps, so that you can remember which run is associated with each action and see the effects of that specific action on HIV care continuum outcomes. However, if you want to tailor the model to your local area, you will need to prepare in advance and fill in each of these parameters with numbers that reflect your catchment area. You will not be able to change these numbers permanently to reflect your local conditions. You will need to input your tailored numbers at each modeling session, as well as re-entering them anytime you click Restore All Inputs. To help you with this, you may recall the purple button to the Parameters worksheet. We created this for you to document what numbers you want to input into the whole system dynamics model to tailor it to your local area, or to keep track of your what-if scenario parameter changes. Print this worksheet out and keep it handy as you use the model. Now let's click Run and take a look at the base case scenario simulation run outputs on the Performance Overview page. The Performance Overview button takes you to a screen that shows output graphs of all the key variables from around the whole HIV care continuum system dynamics model, including key health outputs, as well as service utilization measures and effects of service needs. You can see the results of the base case scenario run indicated as Run 1. Remember that the graphs all have a 5-year or 60-month time horizon, and also will allow you to see the comparison simulation runs. Look carefully at the left side of each graph, since the scale of the unit measures is different in every graph. In the bottom right of this screen is a red Instructions button that will pop up instructions about using the function buttons Run, Clear Runs, and Restore All Inputs anywhere in the whole HIV care continuum system dynamics model. Now let's look at the Decisions Overview page. The Decisions Overview page provides another way to change some key parameters from the various modules in the whole HIV care continuum system dynamics model. This page gives you several tools that allow you to change selected parameters quickly when doing comparison simulation runs. These tools include sliders. For example, you can increase or decrease the number of early intervention specialists by using that slider. Then hit Run after that action. You will also see switches. These turn on and off the action strategy modules, which are initially turned off because not all communities have these programs. Clicking the switch on initiates funding for that action strategy. Hit Run again to implement this action. You will need to go to the Performance Overview page or any of the specific module's performance pages to see the results of your comparison runs. Remember to do a base case scenario run before changing any of these parameters. Also, remember that hitting Restore All Inputs changes them all back to the original condition, including the action strategy off-on switches. However, your runs will remain until you click Clear Runs. The Performance Overview page allows you to see all of your comparison runs. Now let's look at the details of the HIV infection and treatment as prevention module by clicking the green Care Continuum Dashboard button. If you recall, the top-level green buttons are used for the model overview and also for the central HIV infection and treatment as prevention module. This module has two components, the Care Continuum component, which is where you landed, and the infection rate component. To get to the infection rate component, click the dark blue button in the lower right corner. It has its own dashboard, performance, and parameters pages. Clicking on the Care Continuum Dashboard button takes you to a simplified image of the Care Continuum stock and flow model. If you recall, each dashboard page has a red Explain Diagram button, so you can read about this stock and flow model, how it is designed or structured, and what are its key features. This model begins with HIV incidents, or newly infected people living with HIV, who at first are undiagnosed, then get tested and enter the stock of newly diagnosed. Most of them are eventually linked to HIV medical care, then go on to start antiretroviral treatment, and eventually become virally suppressed. However, some may be lost to medical care and require services to return to care. The resulting proportion of people living with HIV who are virally suppressed creates a large feedback loop, indicated by the red line, to the rate of new HIV infections, generating the full cycle of treatment as prevention. Inputs from the different basic services modules, the light blue boxes, and action strategy modules, the yellow boxes if they are turned on, are illustrated here too. Key health indicators are reflected at the bottom in the HIV cascade bar graph and the line graphs, but graphs on this page do not show comparison runs. Go to Performance Overview to see the comparison runs for the whole model. You can get back to the basic services modules and the action strategies by clicking on any of them from here or by clicking the Model Overview button. For example, let's go to the Medical Care Services module. The button takes you to the dashboard page for the Medical Care Services for People Living with HIV module, where you'll find the red function buttons, including an Explain Diagram button, four sliders to easily change some of the key parameters in this module, including the number of early intervention specialists, the proportion of people living with HIV with dependable transportation, the proportion of patients completing scheduled clinical visits, and the maximum HIV visit capacity per month. You will also find key graphs of health indicators relevant to the module, light blue and yellow module buttons indicating inputs into this module from those modules, and orange buttons to move within this module to the performance page for graphic output with its two red function buttons, two orange buttons to move around within this module, and the parameters page for input values that you can change, which will have its two red function buttons, access to the parameter worksheet with the purple button, and again the two orange buttons. to move around inside this module. Both the Performance and Parameters pages allow you to return to the module's dashboard page to see the basic structure again. And finally, you'll always see the green buttons to return to the top level. From here, let's take a look at one of the Action Strategy modules from the Model Overview page. Clicking on the yellow Peer Advocacy for People Living with HIV Action Strategy button takes you to the dashboard page, where you can see the typical features, including the stock and flow model with an Explain Diagram button, basic output graphs, orange buttons to move within this module to the Performance and Parameters pages, light blue buttons to reach some basic services modules that feed into this module, and green buttons to go back to the top level. You'll also see the off-on switch to initiate this module, and some sliders of key parameters in this module, including the annual Peer Advocacy Program budget, and the level of peer advocacy call-up programming, which is a quality scale from 0 to 100. Remember, this module is not contributing to the simulation of the overall HIV care continuum system unless it is turned on. Also, whenever you click Restore All Inputs anywhere in the model, this will return to the off position until you turn it back on. Clicking the off-on switch of an action strategy is one simulation run by itself because it initiates the funding for that action and will have an initial impact, which can be improved upon or undermined by modifying other parameters in the module or in other places in the whole model. So remember to hit the Run button after turning the action strategy on. This has provided a general introduction to the different functions and design of the HIV Care Continuum System Dynamics Model user interface. Remember, you can always find your way to the top of the model by clicking Model Overview. From here, you can get to the How to Use the Model pages, reset the initial parameters on the Model Setup page, change some of the key variables in the Decisions Overview page, and see comparative simulation output on the Performance Overview page. Or you can click on any of the module buttons to go to those modules, or click on background resources to learn more about this model. A few final points and tips about system dynamics modeling and use of this model interface. First, feel free to play with the model on your own to get used to it and how the interface works. But using the model for strategic planning is best done with a diverse group of stakeholders who can discuss their proposals for what-if scenarios to try and then interpret the results and their implications together. Second, it's good to remember the limitations to this model and not to use it in ways that it is not intended to be used. You can find the model limitations by clicking on the Background Resources button and scrolling down to that section. Thank you, and happy modeling!